Hi, I'm Dan Boyd. Welcome to a new episode of Rounding Up the Roundhouse.
And I'm Gleason. Thanks so much for tuning in, everyone.
If you enjoy our podcast, please like and subscribe and consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Albuquerque Journal to help us bring you more content like this. You can find this episode and all of our podcasts on the Albuquerque Journal website, abqjournal.com, as well as YouTube, iTunes, and Spotify. See the show notes for a discount code on a digital subscription. Thank you for supporting the Albuquerque Journal, New Mexico's leading news.
Well, we just reached the halfway point of the session last week, so we're entering the second half. I know we had a big story for the Sunday paper, kind of about the end of the first kind of saga, if this was a two-part movie, and now we're starting on the second stanza. So a lot to kind of catch up on here, but what can you say about what was finished up at the end of the first half of the session?
Yeah, well, I know you were covering a lot of crime and behavioral health stuff. I was covering a lot of water stuff as the second half rounded up. I know we've talked about the strategic water supply before. I feel like I just keep talking about it. But over the weekend, the bill really majorly changed. Previously, it would have allowed for the treatment and reuse of brackish water, saltwater, and underground aquifers, and produced water, which is a byproduct of oil and gas. But a lot of environmentalists and some Democrats were really worried about that produced water aspect. They made a compromise to the bill in the first committee with some tax changes, but ultimately in its second committee just took out produced water entirely. And that seemed to get everyone on board. It passed by a unanimous vote compared to its first 5-4 vote passage, which was a really significant change in thoughts, especially Representative Matthew McQueen, who chairs the House Energy Committee I went through. He's been pretty tentative about that bill, and he did voice concerns still, but he ultimately did vote in favor of it.
Yeah, and you mentioned the crime package and the behavioral health. Democratic leadership had come into the session saying they wanted to kind of expedite these bills in the first 30 days of the session, and they were able to pretty much do that. Just a day or two after the 30-day mark, but the House on Saturday kind of gave the final approval to the crime package that includes 6 different bills, including fentanyl trafficking, auto theft, school shooting threats, a lot in there. But both in the House and Senate debates, we saw Republicans trying to amend the bill to add more crimes. They were unsuccessful in both chambers kind of doing that. So the bill now is headed to the governor's desk. We expect she's going to sign it. It'll be a matter of how long it takes to actually get up to the governor's desk. But probably this week, I would imagine she would sign that bill. But she has also said she still wants other public safety measures to be approved as well. So now the big question will be what other bills kind of move forward and can get some traction, and how much of an appetite for other kind of crime proposals, does the legislature have in these final 4 weeks of the session?
Yeah. And I was talking with House Minority Leader Gil Armstrong, who's really been pushing for more aggressive juvenile penalties to make it in the crime package. And she was really disappointed, like you said, that they didn't make it in the crime package. They're going to try to push something out separately. And yeah, it's a little surprising. It's still, the Republicans are kind of in line with the governor's idea of we need to get more down on crime. And we're nearing the end of February. It's go time.
Yeah, and I think that one you mentioned, the serious youthful offender law, and kind of, expanding the list of crimes that juvenile offenders, those are, offenders under age 18 can be charged with, and these are in violent criminal cases. That's one I think that a lot of people are going to be watching to see if it, I think the Albuquerque District Attorney, Sam Bregman, has really been pushing for that change, and it hasn't kind of moved quite as fast. I did ask some leading Democrats during a news conference on Saturday about that, and House Speaker Javier Martinez said it's going to get a fair hearing, but he also said that there's concerns about, we also need to focus on rehabilitating kids who get, sideways with the criminal justice system and not just incarcerating them. So I think it'll be interesting to see how that debate plays out. I think with this crime package, they wanted bills that there was some bipartisan agreement on, maybe not 100%, but, the final vote in the Senate was 38-3. I think in the House, it wasn't quite that overwhelming, but they managed to get, a bipartisan vote in both chambers in favor of that, and now kind of have these other debates moving forward.
Yeah, and I will note things are still pretty amicable in the Roundhouse, although Republicans have voiced some frustration that Democratic committee chairs are kind of pushing all of their things to the bottom of the schedule. And with the schedules getting longer and longer and longer, that really means it might not have a chance to get heard. So we might see tensions ramp up as it usually does around this time in the Roundhouse.
Yeah, there was a light moment on Friday or Saturday when the Senate approved the crime package and the webcasting went down. So they kind of paused for a little while and put on some music in the chamber. And there was even some dancing and singing. Not the greatest singing and dancing I've ever seen, but it, it was nice to have a few light moments, as you mentioned, as we kind of approach these final weeks where I think tensions will probably rise and people will get a little tired and crankier and the clock is obviously ticking on some of these bills to kind of get over the finish line now that we're in the second half of the session.
Yeah. Another bill that we've seen some more bipartisan support for have been some efforts to reform the Children's, Youth, and Families Department. This is something that a lot of people have agreed about in past years of this is a long troubled agency. We need to come to the table. We need to fix it. And a lot of lawmakers have been quite honest and, maybe these aren't the right solutions, but we need to try something. And 2 measures got through committee last week. The one would create an office of the child advocate, and another one would remove CYFD from the governor's oversight altogether and make it an agency kind of similar to the Public Regulation Commission, a more independent agency. So we'll see. Yeah.
I know you covered that hearing, and it sounded interesting that even some cabinet secretaries in the Lujan Grisham administration showed up to kind of oppose the bill, but didn't have, that didn't really sway legislators on the committee, at least it sounded like.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I mean, they all showed up to oppose the second House Joint Resolution, and it was just a line of like 5 female cabinet secretaries, one after another, speaking against the bill. It actually swayed some lawmakers to support the bill, like Representative Alan Martinez said he wasn't too sure about this effort until he saw all the cabinet secretaries speaking against it. And he said that really says something about wanting to stick to the status quo.
Yeah, and I think that kind of shows the dynamic. I think if that would have happened a few years ago, maybe the vote would have gone differently, but kind of, I think shows a little that and not unique with this governor, but with any governor kind of approaching the final years of their term, maybe losing a little bit of the leverage or kind of the sway they have at the Roundhouse as legislators are kind of aware, obviously, that we'll have a new governor in office 2 years from now. We don't know who that is still, but to your point, I do think CYFD overhaul will be a big issue. Senate Majority Leader Peter Wirth, when I asked him what are going to be the main focuses of the second half of the session, and he cited CYFD as one of those kind of priorities. So I think those bills will kind of take on, be more on center stage, so to speak, now that with some of this crime and behavioral health at least partially resolved. I think some of the climate bills you mentioned also could see a lot of debate. And then obviously there's the matter of passing the budget, which is the one thing they really have to do. And we did see on Friday, a House Appropriations Finance Committee unveiled their budget bill, $10.8 billion. And we're expecting to see it on the House floor this afternoon. So at least in committee, they had a pretty strong bipartisan vote in favor of it. We'll see how that plays out going forward. And then obviously the Senate will have a chance to look that over and make some changes and additions, and as they typically do.
Yeah. And we probably should note that there are a lot of conversations going on behind doors about these kinds of things. You're not seeing the full scope of it in committee all the time, especially with huge packages like this. And we've seen a lot of caucusing happening and a lot of, after the floor session, Democrats and Republicans getting together to kind of make a game plan about how to move forward. Yeah.
And for anyone who doesn't know, caucuses at the Roundhouse are closed door. I mean, this is not something that us reporters are allowed to walk in and listen to Republicans and Democrats as they're kind of talking about strategy. These are still meetings that are allowed to happen behind closed doors and just to kind of sometimes see where members are at on a certain issue, or other times maybe put a little pressure saying, hey, we need your vote on this bill. And so sometimes we hear little tidbits from those caucus meetings, but it's not something that generally the public is allowed into those type of meetings.
Yeah. And, so on Saturday, another bill I want to bring up here, I covered the royalty rates bill. This is something that's come up year and year again. It's never gotten through the Roundhouse. And this year, the difference with the bill is that it's geographically limited to the Permian Basin. So it's the best of the best oil and gas land tracts. It would bump up the cap on royalty rates to 25% rather than 20%, which is more similar to what Texas charges, to what the private market charges. And what happened over the weekend was that it got through the Senate floor, which was a big thing. In the past couple of years, the bill has never passed the Senate. But now it seems like this kind of limited area might actually get the bill through. And The state land office stopped leasing out the best tracts of oil and gas land, they said, until the legislature passes this bill. So maybe it has something to do with the limits, but also maybe it has something to do that the state land office is just refusing to lease out the really, really good tracts.
And this is something that the state land commissioner, Stephanie Garcia Richard, has been pushing for a few years now, right? I mean, and trying to get changed in statute.
Yeah, it's been a repeated effort. And the argument here is that most of this money flows eventually to education. And her prerogative is to make the most off state land as she can for the state as possible. So she argues that we could be making a lot more off of this land than we are right now. And she doesn't want to lose out on that money.
I know we're jumping around a little bit. Another one I wanted to mention, in addition to the budget, is the tax package that we're expected to see. In recent years, we've kind of seen in the final weeks of the session, legislators kind of cobble together different tax proposals into a package and then advance that. So we haven't seen what exactly will be in there yet. There's been some different talk about expanding working families tax credit, which is what House Democrats support. We'll see kind of what reception there is to that idea. There's also been a debate. I was listening to a committee this morning about raising the New Mexico's liquor tax rate, which I think you wrote a story about too, Megan. And the hearing this morning, it was interesting to hear a lot of public health advocates on one side, and then on the other side, a lot of business folks who said this would have a really harmful impact if it's approved. It would be a 6% kind of surtax on all types of alcoholic sales, whether at bars or restaurants or grocery stores. And so that's one that I think people feel strongly on both sides. I don't know that that'll be included in the tax package. That might kind of move separately, but I think advocates are hopeful that they've kind of struck a compromise this year, but clearly there's still a lot of opposition to that as well.
Yeah. And I think I recall the bill sponsors saying that they do want to push this along individually. It's an interesting one because it was like 12% last year, and then over the summer it was 3%. And we've kind of come to this compromise of 6%, but businesses are still saying that's a bit too much, and maybe they would have been on board with 3%, but not with 6%.
And I think some, opponents of this have argued that why should New Mexico be raising taxes right now when there's so much of a budget surplus? I mean, almost $1 billion in new money projected for the coming year. And I think the counter to that is, that a lot of this money is not only, or these tax changes are not geared only at raising money, but also at really changing behaviors, and that they would funnel a lot of the revenue generated to this to treatment programs, some new treatment programs and some existing ones, but really kind of a philosophical difference on that. And I think we'll see that debate only ratchet up over the next few weeks.
Yeah. And I'd been kind of surprised we hadn't heard too much on money yet this session. It seemed like the priority in the first 30 days really was crime and behavioral health. And now we're rolling around to things like the budget and the tax package. Yeah,
I think those will really take on a more prominent role, which is typical in a session, that usually they don't finish the budget until the final week or so of the session, in part just because it's such a huge bill, and I think usually 200 to 300 pages, and it takes a long time to prepare it and make sure all the numbers are in the right spot and the decimal points are in the right spot and all of that. But I think we will see, increasingly more attention paid to budgetary matters, whether that's taxes or budget or, spending initiatives and things like that.
Yeah. It's getting packed. I think probably everybody can tell by how much information we're trying to jam into this podcast now, and it's only going to get busier and busier.
Yeah, and even finding time to record our podcast is becoming a challenge on some of these days. But I think we were on social media kind of trying to figure out the right analogy, if we're at halftime, if this was a basketball game, or intermission, if it was a performance. But it does seem unique to me that there's really a clear, this year's 60-day session, a clear mark that this is kind of done with the first half, and now we're moving on to the second half. And in past 60-day sessions, I haven't seen that as much. I mean, there is still the bill introduction deadline, but this year it really did feel like a distinct kind of halftime, and now we're getting going here in the second half.
Yeah. Well, we'll try to be back another time this week. Hopefully we can squeeze in time for another podcast. But yeah, anything else you want to bring up, Dan?
No, we're hoping to maybe have a budget expert on as a guest kind of later this week. So stay tuned. We'll see if we can make that happen. But yeah, things are moving fast at the Roundhouse. I think the evenings are going to start going a little later, and both of us were working on Saturdays. So certainly a lot going on. And but we appreciate everyone kind of listening to the podcast and following our stories, both in print and on abqjournal.com.
And you can find these podcasts on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. But otherwise, we'll see you guys next time.